Alrighty, it's 10:30. For those of you who were in the first session, I'm going to review some of the same material initially because there's certain things that I want everyone to know, and it doesn't really hurt to hear it a second time, but for those who are here and didn't have the opportunity to hear the first stuff, these are some things that you need to know. First, that's who I am, which is not important. You can read about that later. What is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a specific learning disability. It's neurological in origin, which, moving that would be good, if you can do it. Which is neurological in origin, which I think is really important because you need to understand that it's something that is pre-wired into the individual's brain. We call that neurodiversity, which is a wonderful thing. Neurodiversity means that all of us have different particular skills and abilities that are different than other people. And that's a good thing, because a lot of animals, they do the same thing. If they're not able to eat and run, as soon as they're born, they're going to be someone else's food chain, right? With us, we're born with all kinds of different, and we were born completely dependent upon our parents. We're incompletely developed. It allows the environment to have a huge impact on our brain development, which is a wonderful thing. So we're very adaptable. We can procreate in high places, low places, hot places, cold places, eventually on the moon or somewhere else, because we're good at that stuff. We're very good at adapting. But it's important to know that neurodiversity is a wonderful thing, because as human beings we do outstanding, wonderful, beautiful things when we come together as a group. You know, we also do some heinous, ugly, horrible things too, but we're not going to talk about those things. But one of the issues with neurodiversity is we all have different skill sets. So some people like to get on skyscrapers and weld I-beams together, and that's good because we like big buildings. Some people can write beautiful stories or paint. Some people are great teachers and can work with kids all day long. I'm good at research. I'm not good, I'm a pretty decent teacher, but if I had to be in a classroom with little kids all day long, it's not my skill set. So with neurodiversity, it's an important thing. But one iteration of neurodiversity is the individual who has dyslexia. And whatever their brain was built for was not for reading, it was for other things. And so they have abilities to do other things that other people may not be able to do. But unfortunately, the ability to read is actually not one of them. It's okay. Just glad you're here. And so really when we look at dyslexia, it's neurological in origin. There's genetic factors that we're going to talk about a little bit. But what really the difficulty is, they have a difficult time decoding words. And when you cannot decode words, you can't read very well. You can have secondary issues where you're not going to be able to comprehend the material very well. Because as it turns out that there's also not only attention but memory involved with reading. So when you're reading a sentence and the individual is having a difficult time decoding and spends an enormous amount of cognitive effort decoding a word, by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they may not remember what the beginning of the sentence was about. So there's issues with that too, because we overload the memory component. And so secondary issues deal with comprehension, also with learning infrequent words. The growth of vocabulary is diminished to some extent, because the only way to read infrequent words or to learn infrequent words is to read them. You're not going to hear them on television or radio. You just don't see that. And then, of course, background knowledge. When I was a young kid, my dad said, you can learn anything by reading. And that's true, isn't it? Or YouTube. If you don't want to read it, you can look at YouTube today, but there's information out there. Some characteristics of dyslexia, these are things you've probably seen with some of your kids. They have difficulty with accurate or fluent word recognition, which means they have a difficult time reading words. Poor spelling and decoding abilities. Spelling is one of those systems that actually develops later than reading. In terms of cognitive science, it's a more difficult type of memory system. And as a function of that, spelling actually lags behind reading by years. And not only that, but the English writing system is so difficult that it's, and there's so many alternative spellings that it's pretty difficult. You know, for example, how do you spell the word to? Depends on the context, right? And so there's a lot of words in the English writing system that are like that. So it's difficult. I would disagree that dyslexia can occur even with effective classroom instruction. I think one of the difficulties with dyslexia is that we generally don't have effective classroom instruction for people with dyslexia. And the root cause of that are colleges of education. As teachers, you know, you go to school, you want to learn everything you possibly can to be the best teacher you can be. But if they don't teach you this stuff, then how are you supposed to use it? And that's one of the problems in colleges of education today. They do not teach the science of reading. They very rarely even talk about dyslexia, which is a major difficulty when we consider 20% of our nation's kids have dyslexia and 33% have serious difficulties learning how to read, and we're not teaching the science of reading? Ridiculous. Well, if you look at some of my recent publications, you'll see that I'm becoming more and more outspoken about that because it's ridiculous. And you know, even 20 years ago when I talked to teachers, they'd get angry and say, how come we didn't learn about this in school? And at the time, I don't think I was tenured and I didn't want to cause any trouble and stuff. So I just said, I don't know, maybe you should talk to your teachers. But today, you get to a point, I think, you know, the Erickson scales of development, you know, generativity, it's like, you know, I'm kind of angry at this. I'm in a college of education. I've spent 25 years trying to get these guys to get on board and they're not. And it's a travesty. You know, in Texas, where they've actually have a higher education collaborative where they're working with professors and people in the school systems so that they can actually learn this information and get it to teachers. That's the way to go. But even better is to have people who get doctorates in education who know something about how to read science and do the science of reading. I mean, if we don't address that, we're still going to be talking about these things 20 years from now, which we should be. We should know this stuff. You guys should have already been taught this, but I don't want to get off on that tirade because I could do that. But it's an issue, and colleges of education need to step up and learn this information because the things I'm telling you today, we've known for 30 years. We know more about it than we did 30 years ago, but we knew 30 years ago how to teach reading. And in fact, in the 1880s, they were actually teaching reading the way that probably should be taught that we got away from, which is kind of interesting. I know there's that little machine over there, it's kind of crazy. I figured that, who's that person that won't turn off their cell phone? But reduced reading experience obviously can impede the growth of vocabulary, background knowledge, and those kinds of things too. Some demographic characteristics of kids with dyslexia, it's roughly 20%, 15 to 20% of our nation's kids. Half of them do not graduate from high school diplomas, which is a huge problem. If you don't graduate from high school with a diploma, you're unlikely to be employed properly. You know that if you graduate from high school, you make thousands of more dollars a year than if you don't. Just like when you graduate from college, you'll make thousands of more dollars a year than if you don't, unless you become teachers or social servants, right? And actually, I think a lot of times people think professors make a lot of money, but when I first went to Pittsburgh State University, I had 3 kids. They all qualified for the free reduced lunch program. And we just hired someone in our department who has a PhD with experience, $48,500 per year. It's ridiculous. So education, if you get an education for big money, you know you made a big mistake. It's just not a good thing to do. Kids are also at risk for parental abuse. Some Canadian researchers, Fuller, Thompson, and Hooper in 2014 published some data. They looked at 13,000 young adults. They found that 7% of kids were abused physically by their parents, and 35% of kids who had dyslexia were abused by their parents because parents don't know what dyslexia is about. So they think if they just make them work harder, that they'll fix that problem, but it's neurological in origin. It has nothing to do with how much the kid works, and I'm going to show you some stuff, maybe not in this case, but I can show you imaging of the brain where kids are working super hard to get parts of the brain that aren't supposed to be doing the reading process to work. It's just not working for them. they're more likely to have poor self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and are suicidal, unfortunately. Now these are things as a researcher I didn't really pay a lot of attention to initially. But as a function of being in this field and interacting with other people, like Decoding Dyslexia is a group that you might want to take a look at. There's a Decoding Dyslexia Oklahoma group. They started in 2011, Decoding Dyslexia in New Jersey with 4 or 5 parents. Now it's 2016, they're in all 50 states and 4 provinces in Canada. They're a force to be reckoned with. They're the ones who are out there trying to get laws in states, legislators to create laws to do pre-screening of kids who potentially have dyslexia. They're out there that eventually tell colleges of education, you will teach the science of reading. And they're the ones who are knocking on your door going, what are you guys doing about dyslexia?
What was it called?
Decoding Dyslexia, which I think is a pretty clever name. Because decoding is a pretty important part of the problem. They're more likely to abuse substances. They're more likely to be involved in the juvenile court system, the criminal court system as adults, and on public assistance. So we truly, at the Center for Reading and at CARD Inc., we truly believe that it's a social as well as an academic problem. And that's not to say we could keep people out of prison, because we know there's a lot of people who know how to read really well in prison, or at least some of the people on Wall Street probably should be in prison for the crimes they've committed against us in terms of our economy. They're good readers. But at the same time, if you don't read, you don't have opportunity. You don't have opportunity, then you're more likely to find yourself in a more dire situation. So even though we wouldn't be able necessarily to keep everyone out of prison, I would be willing to bet a good percentage of individuals who probably could do that if they could read. So these are negative things. Some positive individuals who have dyslexia, and there's a lot more individuals than this. It seems like every week a new individual is admitting that they have dyslexia. Tom Cruise has dyslexia. Channing Tatum has dyslexia. So a lot of people out there have dyslexia who are very, very successful. Two of my favorites, they're Helen Taussig. I really like Helen Taussig. She got her MD. She helped co-found pediatric cardiology. But she acquired her MD in the 1920s where a lot of women were involved in medical training because society didn't really want them to, which is kind of goofy, but that's a different time. But she also did it having dyslexia, and early in her career she lost her ability to hear, so instead of using the stethoscope, she put her 2 fingers on the kid's chest and could tell what was going on with the heartbeat. An amazing person, totally amazing, and she did it with dyslexia. Jack Horner is the most famous paleontologist. He worked with Jurassic Park. He helped individuals recognize that actually dinosaurs took care of their young. He was the first to discover a dinosaur embryo. Immensely dyslexic. Had serious problems with his dad, who beat him. And he thought he was stupid. He told Jack he's stupid. Here's the most famous paleontologist, has honorary doctorate degrees from several universities. The other one I think is kind of fun is Dave Pilkey. The interesting thing about Dave Pilkey, because you look at him, well, of course he's dyslexic, can't even spell his first name correctly. But he was working fast food or something as a teenager, and they screwed up on his name tag and left the E out. So they thought it was funny and just went with it. But if you've read any of those Captain Underpants books, he's dyslexic. Henry Winkler, obviously a lot of you guys know him as the Fonz, but he's an author too. And the thing is, when we talk about accommodations, people a lot of times think, why are we giving kids with dyslexia accommodations? It's not helping them learn how to read. Actually, it is. It's helping them. But do you think Henry Winkler, do you think he's spelling all the words that he's writing correctly? No. Does he have an editor that takes care of that? Yes. So, all accommodations do for kids who have dyslexia is give them a competitive chance to do what other kids are doing. So audiobooks are important, giving them longer time to actually read their tests, not grading them on spelling tests, because spelling is going to be just absolutely horrendous for these individuals. Those are important things to do for kids who have dyslexia. Now, obviously, really never make a kid with dyslexia read in a classroom unless they really, really desire to do so. Because kids who have dyslexia, imagine that your biggest flaw that you see as a flaw is identifiable to everyone every time you're asked to read. All of us can hide our flaws. We do. I mean, we pick the professions we have to go with our strengths and minimize our weaknesses. And here, every day, we're pointing out this kid's weakness. And, it turns out kids don't like that very much. Some common myths. Firstly, that dyslexia affects more boys than girls. We really don't see that. Almost every other developmental, emotional, psychological, physical difficulty, males have it 3 to 4 times more often than females, but not so with dyslexia. Some people think it's just dyslexia is a visual difficulty because you see those letter reversing. But letter reversing just indicates that the individual does not understand the code very well. And so you'll see kids in first grade, obviously, that put B's and D's and P's and Q's and those types of things. They mix them up. Kids with dyslexia don't understand the code very well, so you'll see this in high school even, where they have letter reversals. The issue really is that spelling and understanding the code is very difficult. Decoding and understanding the code is also difficult, but less difficult than spelling. And so spelling errors are going to occur for many, many years, even when an individual can read competently. Individuals who are intelligent do not have dyslexia. That's not true. Obviously, if we looked at the individuals in the prior page, some of these guys are really super smart and have dyslexia. People with dyslexia cannot read. We teach individuals how to read every day at our center. And what we're interested in them doing is reading competently, not necessarily fast readers. Because it really doesn't matter when you're in your profession and you're in college, you've gotten into college, no one's telling you how much time you can read. You're going to read outside of class and those types of things. It take longer to do the test, doesn't really matter, they're going to put the effort in. But they certainly can learn how to read. Dyslexia is not outgrown, so these are myths, it's not outgrown. If we just wait and don't do anything explicitly to train individuals with dyslexia how to read competently, they will not learn how to read competently. Now, having said that, some people figure out compensatory strategies that work for them, so that's always a possibility too. And obviously, if people would just try harder, they would not be dyslexic. It's just absolutely not true. And then Einstein had dyslexia. He did not. There's lots of evidence he did not. He also didn't have a math disability. People say that too. And as Americans, we love that. Oh my gosh, this underdog, he couldn't even add 2 + 2, and here he came up with the theory of relativity. Awesome. Because that gives us all hope, right? But in reality, one of his friends, because this myth was going on even before Einstein died, and one of his friends, who was a rabbi, said to Einstein, hey, people are saying you couldn't do math. And he's like, I couldn't do math? I mastered differential calculus by the time I was 15. But he also could read. Because he's at the head of his class even when he was a young person, and you couldn't have done that if he couldn't read. The other individual that's frequently cited as having dyslexia is Leonardo da Vinci, thanks. I always want to say Leonardo DiCaprio, but it's like, or Ninja Turtle, but yeah, Da Vinci, but he wrote backwards on purpose because he wanted to disguise his notes. He didn't want people to know that. And it's really pertinent here, is that he spoke and wrote in Italian, which is one of the more transparent writing systems. So even if he had dyslexia, you would have never known because it's so easy to read in Italian. Even if he had dyslexia, no one would have known. Plus, most of the people couldn't read then anyway. So, but you see that often, and I think it's a problem because when we're trying to make a case to make changes about dyslexia, and we're talking about people who did not have dyslexia like they did, we lose our credibility. So I don't like that. And one of my friends who's in the Decoding Dyslexia movement helped write some of the laws that are now in the state laws. We had quite a discussion about Einstein. I could tell him that he did not have dyslexia. And so finally we're at a national conference sitting next to each other. Louisa Motes, who's one of the national experts in terms of teaching individuals who have not been taught when they were in college how to teach the science of reading, how to teach the science of reading. She went on and on and on about Einstein. Did not have dyslexia. I wanted to go. But I was nice and I didn't do that because I still wanted to be her friend. So here, why is learning to read so difficult? And it has to do with the writing system. It's difficult to learn how to read the English writing system, period. if you have dyslexia, it pretty much stops you in your tracks. But I want to talk about this because this is a really important component when we talk about dyslexia. Obviously, why we have writing systems are used to represent languages. It makes thought permanent. You know that telephone game where if I told you a story and then you told her, and by the time I got over there, it'd be a completely different story. If I gave you something to read, gave it to her to read, it'd be the same thing when I gave it to you to read. It makes it permanent. It's important. In complex society, it's important that we have stuff written down. So we have dyslexia laws that people can go read and see what it's all about. And it's important. So ours is an alphabetically based system. And that's important too. And here's a little bit of information. I think it's kind of interesting because back in the past, they didn't have space in between words. It was just a long block. And the monks who would transcribe the stuff, they never learned how to read because it made no sense to them. When they started putting space between the words, some of the monks actually taught themselves how to read because it made sense. A big block of stuff, putting spaces in there. Some languages didn't have vowel sounds represented and those kinds of things. It's better now, but still, it's complicated. Just so you know, the alphabetic principle. It's an awesome microphone. The alphabetic principle is just that individuals understand that letters represent speech sounds. That's when you hear stuff like the alphabetic principle, well, that must be complicated. No, it just means that people understand that letters represent speech sounds, because that's essentially what's going on there. And that most of the time there's a predictable relationship between those letters and the sounds that they are used to represent those particular sounds. And this knowledge is absolutely critical to the reading acquisition process. If you don't understand this, it's like you don't go past go. You're done. So, a transparent writing system is one in which there's a one-to-one relationship between the letters and the sounds that are used to represent them. Each letter only represents one sound, and each sound is only ever represented by one letter. So, some languages that have transparent writing systems, Spanish and German are sort of like that because they have diacritical marks that tell you how to pronounce the sounds. A Scandinavian language, Finnish, is one of the most transparent writing systems out there. Kids who learn to read in a transparent writing system start to learn how to read later than our kids, and they're done earlier because it's so much easier. That's important. It's easier. So when people compare the educational system in the United States to Finland or Denmark or those places, it's not really all that comparable, particularly with reading. Now, it is true in Finland that they give higher priority prestige-wise to teachers. Like, someone say, oh, here's my girlfriend, she's going to be a doctor. Oh, she's going to be a doctor. Okay. Here's my boyfriend, he's going to be a teacher. He's going to be a teacher? Oh. I mean, the prestige level in Finland regarding teachers is like max. It's hard to get into colleges of education. And in Canada, it's actually hard to get in college of education because they actually prize teachers much more than we do here. You know, I mean, here when we talk about state legislatures, they're always kicking your butt, right? What's going on right now? Oh, teachers don't need to have any dental insurance. Okay, want the teeth falling out in class? Don't we want kids to go, how come your teeth look good? Because I brushed them, I get dental. There's a lot of goofy stuff going out there, but it represents a huge part of the state budget, right? So people attack that. It's unfortunate. An opaque writing system is the opposite. There's not a consistent one-to-one relationship between the letters and the sounds that they're used to represent them. And as an example, there's roughly 43, 44 phonemes in the English language. How many letters are there in the alphabet? 26. Oops. There's a problem. So some letters represent more than one sound. So the vowel sounds, obviously the easy ones are the short and the long vowel sounds, right? But in reality, it gets more complicated than that. For example, look at the E sound, the long E sound itself. We got E by itself, we got EE like in street, EA in heat, E, consonant E, Y, I-E, E-I, E-Y-I. It's nuts. And so, you know, with kids with dyslexia, they say they have trouble with vowel sounds. They don't have trouble with vowel sounds speaking them or listening to them, but looking at vowel sounds and reading them is like, what? How can all those be E sounds? It makes no sense. You know, about 200 years ago, they were going to standardize the English writing system, and they're going to make like quick would be K-W-I-K, quick. But they didn't do that. So here we are. It'd have been a more transparent writing system. Right now it's a very opaque writing system. Even the K sound. You know, how's the K sound? Like, I use the example quick. Q-U, K sound. C-K, K sound. Quick. You know, it's crazy, right? So sometimes it's C, sometimes it's K, sometimes it's CK. The G can be J sound or G sound. Then you add digraphs in, which really mess things up. Because you teach them that, you know, the letters represent particular sounds, and you put two letters together, don't do that. So like, the sh sound is not s, right? So, yeah, it's like I said, it's almost as if someone said, let's make a system up where no one learns how to read. That would be really cool. And those people with dyslexia, let's really get them. That's what their intention was. They did a brilliant job. Of course it wasn't, but the R-controlled vowel sounds, then if you have an R that follows a vowel, it changes the vowel sound. So R, air, I really like because can be spelled three different ways. E-R-I-R-U-R. And so what type of fur you're talking about depends on how it's spelled, right? It's just interesting. So once you've acquired all that information, then you have the issue of alternative spellings, which makes it very difficult. Let's see, German and Latin, Greek, Danish, and French all contributed to the English writing system. So not only do we allow those words to be in our writing system, but we also allow them to retain their writing system, some of which are actually opaque in their own right. So it's very confusing. So Chevrolet, I thought, what? Chevrolet? Why isn't it let? Because you told me that we're talking about a closed syllable, one where there's a consonant that follows a vowel sound, that's always a short sound. We got lay there. What? And we're happened to the T. It's all crazy, right? Now the French don't allow any new words into their stuff, right? And so, but we do. And that's okay. We have new words, you know, even if we use a word incorrectly, the new incorrect usage of the word becomes its new definition. Because the word iterate means to repeat. Reiterate means that you said it, you repeated it, and now you're saying it again. You've done it 3 times. That's what reiterate means. But if you look in the dictionary now, it says to repeat. Because everybody kept saying, well, I said this, now let me reiterate. You didn't reiterate yet, dude. You were repeating. But since we essentially have incorrectly used that word, we just changed the definition. We do that all the time. Like people say, I snuck in somewhere. Snuck is not a word. Sneaked is the word. But everybody uses snuck, so it's probably in the dictionary now. And so if we bastardize language long enough, we just change the language. The French wouldn't like that at all. We're okay with that. And I guess that's okay, but sometimes it's irritating, you know, because if we keep using the language improperly, then, you know, we lose. We've lost tenses in the English writing, the English system too. So, in other words, it's difficult. When we're talking about an opaque writing system, it's very difficult. And what the English writing system is very opaque, which means you don't get necessarily, you don't go from the letter to the sound readily. Sometimes it's going to be represented by a different sound, and so it's difficult. And so then, you know, we have lots and lots of homophonic words, to, and to, through, and you know, fur and fur, all kinds of different ways of doing it. So it just makes it difficult. So the transparent writing system, there is that one-to-one relationship and all this, but when we talk about the opaque writing systems, it's completely different. Somehow I got goofy stuff in here again. All right, speech development. What happens in speech development? Because phonological processing is an important part of what happens when we learn how to read, because in reality, dyslexia is considered a special case of a language disability. If it's a language disability, then where does it really originate? Well, the development of phonological processing actually occurs very early in life. And it's amazing how the brain processes this. Noam Chomsky called our ability to learn a language acquisition device, because there's no way to understand it by learning. We're not really learning the language. Our brain is actually maturing into the language. All we have to be exposed to is to the language, and we're going to basically, most kids are going to learn how to speak the language. And so it's really not a process of learning, it's a process of being exposed to it. And another thing that's interesting about it is what I have up here is the acoustic signal of I like to read. But it's very difficult to see where I like to read, unless you know this stuff very well, where it's differentiated. Because actually, I like t in the T, because the plosive sounds, there's a break, right? So there's a break of silence, read. But otherwise, it's pretty hard to figure out what's what. And so the acoustic signal is a continuous processing of acoustic information, but our brain automatically categorizes it into words, into syllables, which is amazing. We don't have to think about it, it just does it. So that's interesting. And reading development is not like learning how the language. It's not the same process. Generally what happens when we're looking at individuals who are learning how to read, if we kind of characterize it with what happens with our speech development, is we're born with the ability to produce any language. So we can take a kid from California and parachute him into Germany. German parents can raise the kid, they'll learn German perfectly. We can take a kid from Korea and parachute him into Kentucky, and they're going to learn English with an accent. It's one of my favorite comedians is second generation Korean. His name's, I think, Chung. And when he's on television, he says, now if you just turn on the TV set, don't turn the channel because the speech and the vision go together. But that's the language you learn, right? And so we have almost all children, unless they're aphasic, are going to learn the language environment in which they're in. That's how that works. And so they start producing only the sounds they hear by the time they're 3 to 6 months of age. They're only producing the sounds they hear in their language environment. And then by a year of age, they're usually doing a few words like mama, dada, ball. By the 18 to 20 months or so, they're saying things like go outside, which means, you know, it's a pretty day outside, I'd really like to go outside. The sun's shining good, let's go outside. But they can't say all that, they just go outside. But they're thinking all that, kind of. And then later on, they're producing sentences, and by the time they're 3 and 4, they're just picking out so many words a day, it's mind-boggling. But it's because our brain is able to do that. Learning how to read is not like that at all, though. It's piggybacked on the language. And so by the time we get a kid who is 4 or 5 years of age, they've done all this phonological development, they're learning their language very well. If they're driving down the street and the kid says to you, hey mom or dad, you know, stop and hop, they kind of sound the same. Stop, 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 hop, hop, hop. You should be going, yeah. Because those kids are unlikely to have dyslexia. Because kids with dyslexia, you can say things to them like, say the word dog, and the kid says dog, and you say, now say without the d sound, and the kid goes, doggy, puppy? Because they don't get what you're asking. You ask a kid who's not going to have dyslexia to do the same thing, say the word cat, and the kid says cat, say now say without the t sound, they go cat. What's up with that? That's easy. But see, kids with dyslexia don't have the neurological ability to do that. And that's a problem. And so the process of learning how to read, it begins with speech development. You get the phonological processing. You get the writing stuff, which is important, understanding that the words kind of sound the same, that you can use them as linguistic building blocks. You can say the word dog and say, now instead of putting a sound in there, put a luck sound in there, and the kid goes, log. right? They get that. So that's important. Then you start working on mapping sounds on letters, because they already have the sounds, then they need to know that those letters represent those sounds. Then you work on decoding, and then synthesizing, and then spelling and comprehension. That's how the reading developmental process works. And then, you know, kids who are reading at the end of kindergarten, beginning of first grade, they're putting their finger on that word, and they're going, and you know, they're decoding, and they're going, k, at, t, k, at, cat, right? Very slow, it's arduous, and as they develop those decoding skills, as they understand the relationship between letters and sounds and are decoding, then they work at it enough, they become roughly automatic processes. And automatic processes for a cognitive scientist means that it takes very little cognitive energy. So if you're spending this much on the decoding process and you have that much left over for comprehension, you're probably not comprehending much. But as you get decoding better, where it takes less cognitive energy, you have more left over for comprehension. So phonological processing deficits is essentially the difficulty with most of these issues is neurological in origin. As we showed in the first session, we showed you the neurological processing involved with that. Those neural connections weren't made because of the genetics, didn't have the blueprint to lay those neural pathways down. And so that neurodiversity that we see, one iteration of neurodiversity is the individual who has dyslexia, which, by the way, most people don't want dyslexia. And I'll just say this again, because there's a movement out there that says dyslexia is a gift. It's not a gift. Ask any kid who has dyslexia, they're not likely to say, yeah, that's awesome, I love this gift. They're more likely to say, if this is my gift, I want to trade it with somebody else's gift, because mine wasn't a very good one. And that's not to say they don't have skills and abilities that are outstanding in other areas. They most likely do. But they don't like the inability to learn how to read competently as easy as other kids. They don't like it. We've talked to a lot of kids with dyslexia, and none of them ever said, ooh, I'm glad I have dyslexia. It's awesome. They don't say that. We also know that genetics plays a role. Oh, I bust through that pretty quickly. That's pretty awesome. So, what I wanted to really show with this particular session is that I think as adults, since we're good readers, oftentimes we forget how difficult it was to learn how to read because it was so long ago. We've read so much that it just doesn't seem possible. It was difficult. But the actual English writing system is extremely difficult. It's opaque. It's hard to crack into. And kids who have dyslexia don't have the neurological underpinnings to really process that information very well. And as a function of that, it really makes it very difficult. For example, I probably should mention too that dyslexia is a genetic neurological issue that we see across every culture. It's just in cultures where there's opaque writing systems like ours, it basically stops them and can render them illiterate as adults. Some never learn how to read. Without explicit instruction, they'll never learn how to read. Where kids in Finland and like Germans, for example, when they talk about dyslexia, they don't talk about it stopping their kids in the track. They talk about them being slow readers because the decoding process is so easy that even with the neurological inability to do that very well, the decoding process is so easy that they're able to read it, just they're very slow when they read. And so most of the time with individuals in Germany who have dyslexia, they talk about them as slow readers. And so it just kind of buttresses that notion that an opaque writing system really makes it extremely difficult to learn how to read. So we got more time for questions this time. Yes?
I've been trying to look up a little bit about dyslexia and everything, and I did call the Dyslexia Center in Tulsa, and they just said, sorry, you're a teacher, the reason you can't do anything about it is you're not a neurologist. You need to be a neurologist, so that's why you're not, they don't train you in, I don't know, I got my master's degree in reading specialist, and there was nothing about.
Did you get it here in Oklahoma?
Yeah, in Northeastern State University.
Yeah, they don't, in other states, they actually show.
So anyway, where can we find that? Because like I have gotten online with some, but they're like really sequential programs, which is what they may need, but it's like thousands of dollars to learn how to teach kids the way they teach them in there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know,
Well-
I would spend the thousands of dollars, but then there's thousands of ones to choose from, and then you're going out of state, and I'm not taking care of my elderly dad, and blah, 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 and I
Right.
don't know. I just feel like I haven't been able to have anything I can just really hold on to and try, even after school, individually with some kids, that I'd be willing to work with them individually.
Mhm. Well, firstly, I'm not a neurologist. I'm a developmental psychologist, and my whole career has been based on dyslexia. We help kids learn how to read, and adults. The oldest person we worked with is 63, and he also had an intellectual disability. We worked with individuals in their 50s and their 20s, mostly kids though. Dyslexia is one of those areas where we should be sharing as much information across specializations as possible. Neurology is really important because it tells us what's going on with the brain. And they can intervene and show, I mean, in our first session, we showed really how that when you do interventions that are appropriate, you can actually change brain functioning. Because that's what happens with the brain. When we learn something new, it changes neurochemistry and the way we process information. So we can do that. It doesn't have to be expensive. Probably in a fairly short period of time, we've trained teachers how to, that lady over there, in the end over there, Carrie. She's done some of our training and worked with kids with dyslexia, and we're not in it for the money. You know, it's not going to cost thousands of dollars. You just come up, spend your time with us. We'll train you our techniques. And some of our techniques, actually, one of the first component we do is the phonemic discrimination task, where kids who have dyslexia do a very poor job of discriminating between speech sounds. We have a task that actually trains them and their brain to do that. Then everything else is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So I think in school systems, a lot of times we want a kid reading here, and they're reading down here, but we keep hammering them here. We keep hitting them. Well, they're not strong enough. It's like taking someone, we want them to bench press 200 pounds, and like, okay, let's see what you can bench press 50. Okay, tomorrow come in, we're going to start our weight training, and they have them at 150 pounds. Like, I can't budge it. Okay, well, come back tomorrow, we'll try again. Can't budge it. We're not doing it the right way. We got to start at 45 pounds, do it twice. The next day we do it 3 times. The next day 5. You know, the next day after that we do 50, and then we keep building up. And that's what we do. We start at something they're capable of doing, give them success at doing it, getting them stronger at that, which increases the probability they're going to do the next step better. We keep working that way. And really, within a matter of a couple of months, generally with younger kids, we have them competently decoding pretty well.
So you're from Pittsburgh, so
It's a couple hours away.
I'm Pittsburgh.
No, it's Pittsburgh, Kansas.
Oh, 2 hours.
Yeah, a couple hours. I like to hang out in Tulsa. Tulsa's a cool place. Yeah.
Do you, at your program, I mean, it seems to me, based upon my limited experience, that it's not only about reading comprehension, but it's also about speed. So when you talk about lifting 40 pounds or 50 pounds, I kind of visualize that to be the coding that these multiple sounds make from multiple combination of letters. But they not only must be able to do that, but they must be able to do it quickly and then comprehend, of course, as the final test.
Yeah.
So do you time?
We don't.
Do you time these?
As a function of getting stronger in these sub-skills of phonological processing and decoding and synthesizing, they'll generally become more efficient. We don't emphasize speed, as I'm not, as an example, everything that I read is technically difficult, so I read very slowly. And if you're a runner and everything you do, you run slowly, even in a race you're going to run slowly because you have no experience running quickly. And so my wife reads, and she does other things per day, but she usually finishes a book a day. It would take me a week to do what she does in a day because I'm slower at it. I'm a competent reader, I'm just slow. Slower. Not slow, I'm just slower. But, we don't emphasize speed, but as a function of getting stronger in these particular sub-skills, they generally get to be quicker, but that's not something we're really all that concerned about.
So you don't emphasize that.
We
You
don't.
emphasize basically the coding of the words.
Right, and the coding of the word, actually, there's many components even within the word and sub-skills within that process that need to be strengthened each. So there's a lot of things going on. But once we get to that point where, we'll talk about interventions later on too, but once we get to the point where they're doing these things relatively well, they end up obviously reading quicker. Because if you're not reading at all, that's really slow. And then when you're able to do some of it, but as a function of strengthening those skills, generally individuals become quick readers, but our emphasis isn't on how fast they can read. Emphasis is really on getting them to the point where they can read it and then comprehend what they're reading. But generally they kind of go together. Yes? What type of growth do we see in the program? Generally speaking, and I think it's because we do that phonemic discrimination task, but we see growth. We see growth really in a couple of sessions, and we see kids doing relatively well, usually 2 to 4 months. And we had one student who, she was there for 2 years, but she was doing pretty well, but her parents really wanted us to strengthen her. So we got her in 5th grade, and this is kind of a cool story because the grandparents were, I think she's the only grandkid at the time, and they put money away, and so each quarter they get a report on their finances and stuff, and they'd show her, hey, here's the money you're going to college, it's getting better and better, and unbeknownst to them, she's thinking, I'm never going to college because I can't read. And so she came to our center, and the last day that she walked out of our center, she told her grandmother, I can go to college now because I can read. Her grandmother was like, I had no idea, you didn't think you would go to college. But, she couldn't read. But she actually did pretty well after about 6 months and a year, and they're like, well, we just really want you to continue on, so we do that.
Is it like a direct instruction approach, like what you were
I couldn't hear that.
direct instruction approach?
Yes. Yeah, direct instruction actually, if you look at the research, is really the best approach. Yeah. Yeah, it's, we do it one-on-one. And I think it's possible to do like one teacher to 2 or 3 kids, but really with kids with dyslexia, I would not want to go more than about 3 kids or so at a time. They can learn from each other, but when you get 5, and they also have, we didn't talk about this much, but roughly 30 to 50% of kids with dyslexia also have ADHD. We don't need any more of that going on. So we generally do one-on-one. But 1-on-3 is a possibility once they get through the discrimination task, which is 1-on-1. But eventually we'd like to come down here and train teachers, do this stuff. I mean, Louisa Moat says that learning to read is like rocket science. And I would agree with that, it's complicated. But our strategy to teach kids how to read who have dyslexia is not complicated. And we get fairly rapid improvement, which at times I'm shocked at, Because every summer, someone will say, well, my kid's having this horrendous problem, we're like, why don't you come for a week? And the first time we did that was a kid from Switzerland, because in Switzerland they are bilingual German and English, and most of the schools teach in English, which means you have to read in English. And the father, who was a Swiss banker, which I did not know this at the time, had a friend at Oxford University, said, give me the 3 best reading programs in the world, I'm taking my kid there. Well, one of them was ours, I don't know how that happened. But he called me and said, what can you do? And I told him, and I said, since you're flying over from Switzerland, paying for a week to be here, we won't charge you. And I said, here's what I can guarantee you. And the kid came in at the 15th percentile in reading. And he left at the 85th in 1 week. But that was intense. Now it's like going to running camp. You get really good at running, you're doing stuff, and at the end of the week you go home, you're like, I ran a lot last week, I don't think I will today. So if you slack off, you're going to lose it. But they didn't, because his goal was to read a Harry Potter book, which is not written for children. I mean, it's written for children, but not written at children reading level. And he did that, and we found out last year that he was accepted into a doctorate program in neurology, which you think to yourself, would he ever gotten there had he been to our place? Maybe not. Why is he interested in neurology? Dyslexia, neurology, so it's kind of a cool circular story. And I'm Facebook friends with him, so I get to see what's going on with him too. Any other questions?
So what is the name of your reading program? Is it something that you all have written, or is it something that's already written and you all implement it?
Yeah, right now, strangely enough, it's me and 2 graduate assistants. And if you Google my name, you'll see we're doing scientific research and stuff and still doing that. We provide interventions, a lot of them, and assessments. So we're trying to get this, we haven't written in kind of a bare bones, our training manual, but we'd like to increase that and then start training teachers how to do what we're doing. But really, because again, we're interested in spreading the word. I mean, you can make lots and lots of money doing this if that's your goal is, but it's not really our goal. We want you to learn these strategies to help kids, because when I'm 90 years old, I'm going to be going, yeah, help a bunch of kids become decorators. You know, that's kind of my goal.
So if we wanted to come up like how do you do teacher training? Like if let's say I was willing to come up there.
Yeah,
for a weekend, a week, or how do you do that?
Probably, like we could do a day, and then we could, you could come up another day, and then we email and talk. Because really, it is, I think, shockingly simple what we do. And you know, when people are telling you it's going to cost you thousands of dollars and you have to go through all this training, not for us. And if we're as effective as everybody else, why bother? Because people a lot of times they ask me how familiar I am with different reading programs. I really don't care about it, because ours works. You know,
I
so.
have a friend of mine, so we could definitely, we could bring it up together and engage. I have no problem with that. I do
Yeah.
that. It's like a whole year.
It'd be fun for us too.
So I just contacted CAR.
Yeah, you can do my email there. My other email, yeah, my other email address is dherford@pittstate.edu, pittstate.edu. And I'm a junkie about email, so I check it pretty frequently.
When you're working with students like this, when they come into your program, what do you recommend, like an hour or whatever? You know, do they work for an hour a day, or do they work for
Yeah, it's
4 hours?
usually a half an hour to an hour a day, because it's pretty intense stuff.
Okay.
When they come for a week, we give them breaks and a long lunch, because it's pretty intense. But, yeah, you guys can do that in your classrooms pretty easily, I think.
I don't mind staying after school and weekends with my kids, I just don't even know what to do.
Right. Yeah, well, we want to tell you what to do.
Experiment, you know, it's just trial and error, but I
Yeah.
just want to put any, I want to get through it, so I say I need to try the whole lot. Because I don't know, I don't want to just say to the kid, oh, okay, it's great, you never learned to read, I'm going to help you learn to read, maybe, I don't know, you want to try this with me, spend all your time and energy with me, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
So I haven't even really tried anything, but I want to test.
Yeah, every kid that comes to the place, I always tell my guys, this is really important. I really want this kid to do well. They're like, you say that about every kid, but it's true. I mean, we want every kid to learn how to read.
Dyslexia is not a category. They don't qualify for that. So we push, like through our special ed directors,
Yeah, you need to push that, because it's actually federal law. In IDEA, it says dyslexia. It's in the federal law. So when people say they don't,
we run into that too, they will qualify.
They will not, I had a parent actually deny that.
We have trouble getting, I have trouble getting our school counselors and sites to qualify for special ed. And I'm
Well, here's part of the problem.
School site admission earlier.
this is part of the problem, and I can explain it to you a little bit, is that dyslexia, there's severe dyslexia, there's not severe dyslexia.
Yes.
So you have some kids who qualify for special ed who have dyslexia, and some kids who have dyslexia do not qualify for special ed. Then you can go to the 504 plan and do accommodations, which I think is appropriate. Because like, there was a woman from San Diego that sent me her kids' evaluation reports. It was like this thick, double-sided. It was incredible. It was very intense and efficient. And I told her, your kid definitely, beyond a doubt, has dyslexia. Does not qualify for special ed. Now, 504 plan, she goes, we got a 504 plan. What are they doing? Audiobooks, longer test taking. I'm like, what else do you want? I mean, that's pretty much all they could do legally for that kid. You know, so when we talk about dyslexia, there's some kids that really qualify and some kids don't. But I think it's important that parents get a diagnosis of dyslexia, particularly for the accommodations component, and they're starting to give a little crack, the ETS is a little crack in allowing longer time periods for kids with dyslexia for the ACT and SAT and that kind of stuff. Those are important things. But yeah, still people don't understand dyslexia, or just don't get it.